And next up actually is going to be a conversation with one of the Breakthrough Alliance winners from earlier on this year, with the Breakthrough Alliance competition just finishing. Prior to this, preceding this this conversation. So I think Oded is here already. What we might do is, oh yes, there he is. You guys are going to get started off on your conversation around mental health, no doubt. And I will leave you in very capable hands of Julia, and have a great conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jerry, and thanks, Oded, for joining. It's great to see you again. And yeah,
Likewise.
I can't wait to get stuck into this. So for the benefit of the audience,
good to see you.
Absolutely. So for the benefit of the audience, why don't you start by just, giving a bit of background on yourself and what you do with Grey Matters Health.
Sure, happy to. And again, thank you for having me here tonight or this afternoon for you. My name is Oded Kraft. I'm co-founder and CEO of Grey Matters Health. Father of 2+1 amazing daughters, husband to Shelly. I live in Haifa in Israel, and did spend quite a bit of time in the US, among others, actually going to high school in Philly. My career as a whole revolved around healthcare, imaging, and data in this or other combination, always with the US market in focus. It started as an electrical engineer from the Technion, serving in an IDF intelligence core technology unit that was actually assigned to work with the US DoD in beautiful San Diego, imaging and data. Then GE Healthcare, nuclear medicine, and PET-CT applications, initially as the system architect and later on leading that business unit globally. A startup named Medingo, developing insulin patch pump for diabetes as VP product and biz dev, sold to Roche in Germany. And in my last role there, led the Roche Diabetes Care long-term product portfolio, and almost Grey Matters, then VP product development at Kornit Digital, which is still doing very nicely on NASDAQ and is doing digital printing on textiles. So again, imaging, but very different. And finally, through a very serendipitous meeting, met my co-founders, Rani, Shai, and Professor Hendler to have established Grey Matters.
Amazing. I love the serendipitous meetings. It can lead to so much.
Oh yeah, especially when they're over coffee. Yeah.
So what exactly is Grey Matters Health? What do you guys do in a nutshell?
So maybe before we dive into details, so our mission is to help patients gain control right now over emotion regulation processes. We do it by bridging the gap between psychiatry and neuroscience. We are in the process of developing an adjunct therapy for mental disorder, focusing on post-trauma stress disorder, PTSD first, to be followed by depression, major depression disorder. We do it by computing an amygdala fMRI-based biomarker from EEG signal and training patients to control it, down-regulate it. And the good news is that in our studies, we see that this actually leads to significant reduction in their symptoms. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And how did you get the idea to get started with Grey Matters Health? Like, what led you to that passion project?
Well, serendipity, as I said before, but the credit is really due to Professor Hendler, Talma. Talma is a psychiatrist and neuroscientist by training, MD, PhD. And as a psychiatrist, she saw the gap in therapy and the available therapy today. The fact that most patients don't even seek therapy for multiple reasons, and that those who do will see partial improvement alongside a long list of side effects. So that's the psychiatrist side. And then as a neuroscientist, she understood the underlying mechanisms, namely that specific processes and regions within the brain do display some abnormal activity or reactivity to stimuli. For example, our focus right now is emotion regulation system, and specifically the amygdala, a structure, as you probably know, very deep within the brain, serving as the emotion regulation hub. And it plays a key role with multiple disorders, including PTSD. So being trained with both disciplines, she saw the potential in combining the two. And that's how this started. There was a large also US DoD grant funding the initial activities. And on a personal level, in addition to all of that, Talma's partner in life, Judd, who just passed away last month, faced PTSD symptoms from his combat experience throughout, his adult life. So this is personal as well, and that's pretty much how it started for her. And when Ronnie Shai and I started working with her in 2016, so 5 years ago, when we understood what she was doing, I mean, the creativity and the multidisciplinary aspect of what she's doing, and read about the sheer number of patients living with mental disorders, we became captivated with the idea, doing something that is so, well, interesting, to say the least, and that can benefit so many. So for 3+ years, we just waited and for the studies to conclude and technology to mature while we were understanding what's going on in the markets, until we finally raised the seed February 2020, 2 weeks before the first COVID lockdown. Yeah, it wasn't easy. And, like anything else in psychiatry, it does take a lot of patience for things to mature. So that's the story.
Absolutely. And I mean, just to come back to a point that you made earlier, about sort of how you've seen the opportunity for having such a big impact on so many people. I mean, we spoke about this the other day too when we connected, is that, even a few years ago, I was a neuroscience student, and when we were taught about PTSD, we were taught that there isn't really too much you have in terms of options for therapy. I mean, we covered something like exposure therapy and maybe one other thing, but it really didn't seem like there was too many options available at the time. And, coming back to sort of what you guys are doing with sort of neurofeedback and fMRI and things like that, I would love to hear about how your work with Grey Matters Health is actually disrupting this paradigm of care for mental health, for PTSD in particular, which, can devastate the lives of people. So yeah, could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's good that you bring that experience, because that, leads another level of, or creates another depth level to everything. And so when you introduce a new modality, a new product, new technology to the market, we have to be mindful and respectful of the practices that are being practiced today. That is really what is helping folks today, even if there are, deficiencies and gaps. So we have designed our product with this in mind, meaning that we basically are new entrants to an existing environment, an existing ecosystem. We designed, therefore, our products to enhance the efficacy of standard of care, pharmaco and psychotherapy, not rule it out, not replace it, because ethically, well, practically, regulatory-wise, you name it, it's not going to happen. So we are an adjunct, and we're good with that, because we do want to enhance, the clinical outcome of what is out there today. Our preliminary studies show that results that are very significant clinically when practiced this way. Now, clinic therapy will initially be provided in outpatient clinics and in the future at home, again, because we want to make sure that we create a safe place for professionals to practice this. Now, the core, this is about the introduction to the market. Now, the core of the disruption is that while most or all standard of care therapies, modalities, they focus on symptoms or behaviors, we go after the underlying brain processes, as I mentioned before. It is what the NIMH calls domains, the RDoC, Research of Domain Criteria framework, the negative valence, the positive valence, so on. And this is going back to Talma's experience as a neuroscientist. So we are practicing, that in the core of our product. And we do it by using our proprietary biomarkers, which I'll explain as well. The second is that we are leveraging what's known as the sense of agency, meaning the patient's ability to help him or herself. So unlike drug therapy, where basically the patient is the object of taking the drug, or psychotherapy, where there is a sense of agency, but they do need to cooperate, here they can actually learn that they can help themselves, which is huge, especially in PTSD. And all of this to date with no severe side effects. And that whole approach of sense of agency and caring for the patient goes back to Talma's training as a psychiatrist. Now, at the end of the day, it's good that we have good science, but now how do we place it at the hands of the professional? So we designed a therapy that includes 15 sessions spread over 8 weeks, so pretty much standard psychiatric program, plus booster sessions. We all know what boosters are now. Yeah, another benefit, if you will, of COVID. Each session is very short, 30 minutes, where the patient learns how to modulate the relevant biomarker as calculated by processing the EEG in real time. And during these sessions, the patients are guided by the mental health care professional. Again, they are the agent in that sense, and practice modulating the biomarker. So they learn. This is called learning. So putting this together, it's a scientifically grounded innovation placed in the hands of professionals to benefit patients.
Amazing. And just now when you were speaking, you reminded me of a conversation I had with someone a few weeks back. They were telling me just about, just to your point about agency, they were telling me about how working in addiction and with rehab facilities and people who come to rehab facilities for treatment, how actually within a year of leaving the facility, I think the figure was 75% of people relapse. But actually one big intervention that they found, which is pretty simple but has a pretty big impact, is imaging the patient's brains when they arrive and then imaging them when they leave. And something about the way the physicality of the brain is different on those two images actually leads to a reduction in relapse, because the patient is able to physically look at something and say, oh, I did actually change. I have actually made an improvement. And so having that belief reinforced by something they can actually see leads to better health outcomes. And so I just thought it was a relevant point to what you mentioned about agency there.
Absolutely. So just I want to add to what you were saying. We don't have any testimonials from the study that is going on right now, but from previous ones we have. And I would maybe separate the testimonials into two groups. The first is that patients who've undergone took part in the active arm versus the control say that the skill that they have gained throughout the sessions kicks in whenever it needs to. So this is called a habit. And then the other group says that they can access that skill, okay, when they need to. So for example, if they wake at night, and either one is fine, either one is good, because in both cases we provided a person with another tool in the toolbox to just be better. So either one works for me.
So you talked a bit about how your therapies work. It's 15 sessions, right, where people can go and sort of try to learn how to modulate their biomarkers. Could you tell us a bit about the tech behind how this works? Because I know that you use a mix of things. You use fMRI and EEG and machine learning, if I'm not mistaken. So how does this all sort of fit together to give the patient a seamless experience and improve their health outcomes?
Yeah, so let's dive into technology further. So I want to take you back in time to 2012, roughly. And this is when Talma, again, I'd like to give her the credit here because she's amazing and has done so much. She had the foresight to say, oh, there are these two letters, machine learning. Let's see what we can do with that. And that's when the idea of actually combining EEG and fMRI came to be in a way that I'll describe. So our technology is based on, I would say, at the moment, two main elements that will be more in the future. The first is the EFP, the electrical fingerprint. The EFP is a machine learning-based model that is created by fusing simultaneously acquired EEG and fMRI. So imagine that we take a few dozens of individuals, we put the EEG cap on their head to measure the electrical activity on the scalp within an fMRI scanner. We task them with specific cognitive and psychological tasks and collect the data simultaneously. The collection of these simultaneous data sets allows us to produce what we call an amygdala fMRI-based EEG biomarker. Okay, many buzzwords, but we focus on specific regions in the brain. We build the models to find the right model that allows us to create the proxies, which are the biomarkers. Now, think of it as, maybe bringing together the best of both EEG and fMRI, the accessibility of the EEG, easy to use, relatively low cost, and then the fMRI's spatial resolution. the best modality to view brain activity in real time, though very expensive and therefore not really a viable option business-wise. So the result is that EFP, that model that allows us to move between the two. What's nice about the EFP is that it is computationally very lightweight, and it is patient generic, which means that we can use it in real time for EEG processing, and the patient does not need to do an fMRI scan. So we remove that barrier. Now, the level of that biomarker, okay, controls the action level of the second element, which is an interactive audiovisual interface. Yes, it might be VR in the future, although they tend to be a bit on the heavy side today, or brain-computer interface. So what do you see there and what do you hear? So imagine you see a virtual scene, let's say even of that Zoom call, but with more, avatars on the screen, and they're all yelling and jumping in their seats, or a doctor's office where the avatars are yelling at the receptionist. Now, the patient, and this is very important, is guided to seek a mental strategy that would get the avatars to sit down. So the guidance they receive is in the context of the audiovisual interface they receive. The interface then responds to the change in the biomarker level. So if it's up, more people are going to stand up and shout. And if it's decreasing, then they will sit down. So in essence, we are placing a mirror in front of the brain function that we're after, that specific biomarker. And what happens over the 15 sessions is that, like you said, patients practice, and then it becomes a habit or a skill. And what we've seen in several preliminary studies is that treatment does lead to significant alleviation of symptoms and clinical outcome. That's all we could ask for. Yeah.
No, definitely. And so let me just make sure I understood this correctly.
Yeah.
So you're creating sort of these artificial, you're almost using like a metaphor to help the patient regain regulation of their amygdala in this case.
Yeah, it's a good way to see it. And the other thing that many physicians and people we talk with liked is the fact that, unlike exposure therapy and other modalities available today, the interface is quite naive. We call it neutral, meaning it doesn't take the patient through their trauma again and again. It's a bunch of people yelling and shouting and making some noise. Actually, some of them are coughing. We didn't plan this, but during COVID, this
and you raised your own
actually
2 weeks before COVID.
this actually became the big stressor. But it's not. It's a non-trauma interface, so patients don't have to relive their trauma. They learn to control it.
Mm-hmm. And that's fantastic. That's really amazing stuff. Very inspired.
Thank you.
So actually, to that point then, about the patients themselves. So who are they? I mean, you spoke about PTSD, and my mind goes to veterans straight away. Obviously, you mentioned some folks that you've worked with being sort of military personnel, ex-military. How do you see this applying to the population? Who do you think could benefit from this kind of therapy?
So right now, we're focusing. Our first product will be indicated for treating chronic PTSD. It's also true for complex PTSD. Chronic being 1 year until 20 years since the trigger event. Complex PTSD refers to individuals who've undergone ongoing trauma, typically since very young age, civilian and military. The majority of PTSD patients are civilian, car accidents, violence, sexual abuse, and yes, there are military as well. In the studies that we've conducted until now, we have a mix actually from all different trigger events. Later on, we do plan on expanding this to treating additional disorders, be it by using the amygdala EFP biomarker we have developed now, or using EFP of other processes. All of that, again, to place the product initially at the hands of mental health care professionals to improve clinical outcome and standard of care, later on at home by focusing on specific mechanisms.
Amazing. And I know that you've mentioned also that you are planning to expand this eventually to also treat major depression.
Right.
How do you see that sort of unfolding?
So, we focus on PTSD. That's something that we'll take to the FDA next year. And then we're not stopping, like you said, with the amygdala and PTSD. We are also starting to work on anhedonic major depression disorder therapy. And this is a very exciting project because we talk a very large population that lives with anhedonic symptoms, the inability to experience pleasure. That's one reason it's exciting. The second is that we will be using a very different system of the brain, the reward system, which tends to be hypoactive for individuals living with anhedonic symptoms. And here we're going to upregulate the biomarker of that system. The third reason why this is such an exciting project is because we are doing this together with the McLean Hospital team up in Boston, with whom actually we met for the first time in person. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, after having worked together on this for about a year. So we got that small window before Omicron to travel to the US, meet with them, with NYU and others, and yeah, just keep things off screen. So it's very exciting, and more. If I can add to what you just asked, more is coming later on. It's additional disorders. You talked about substance use, so that could be on the horizon as well. Moving to home settings, and finally, I think the most exciting thing at the end of the road, or a part of the big vision and ambition, is that imagine all the data that we will be collecting from therapy sessions. We can already see, you know, the patient comes in for 15 sessions and then boosters once in a while, and we get the psychiatric questionnaires, all of course, the identified and HIPAA compliant. And so what we can see already that it's possible to identify cohorts of patients. So we can therefore develop and personalized treatment, as well as develop future monitoring and diagnostics tools. So, you know, we do need to build quite a large database on the cloud, but even with the small amounts of data that we have, we can see that we get some good signals. So we are, as always, optimistic.
Of course. No, that sounds amazing. Lots of scope and lots of good things on the horizon for you guys, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I was wondering also, so obviously we've praised you a lot, but no endeavor is without challenges. So I'm curious if you could shine a light on what kind of challenges you've faced, just because I know we have some fellow entrepreneurs in the audience, and I feel it's always better to sort of share these things rather than not.
Okay.
So yeah, what kind of obstacles have you faced?
So maybe if that's we have entrepreneurs in the audience, then just know that you don't know. Maybe a couple of tips before we talk about the challenges. Know that you don't know, and pick your buddies for the journey well. You depend on them, and they depend on you. So just these two tips, I think, are very important. Challenges. So the challenges change across the lifetime of the company. I'll talk more about what we have now than we did before, where we had pretty much very little data to go on and more of an intuition and hunch. So now I think, you know, as we start to think more and more about the market, and this is true for many healthcare technologies, it's the long change cycle. So it takes a long time for the system, the healthcare system, to adopt new technologies, new modalities. There is a change in recent years, especially when it comes to digital therapy, especially also to mental health, in part, or in great part, facilitated by COVID. So I do hope for accelerated adoption. We can count on it. We cannot count on it. So we are always and constantly in touch with payers, providers, mostly in the US. And that's our way to approach that. Second is that what we do is very close or quite resembles neurofeedback or biofeedback. There are many differences, but still. And so biofeedback and neurofeedback don't have the best of reputation when we talk about mainstream healthcare. And our approach to this is just facing this head on and working to distinguish ourselves from typical neurofeedback, be it through the workflow design. For example, in our case, the healthcare professional doesn't have to tweak and play with the system during therapy. So it not only lowers cost, but it also simplifies the whole process. Clinical results, the fact that we target a specific mechanism, in fact, and last, I would be amiss to ignore COVID, big surprise, big risk, a huge scare when we did the round, and we just learned to cope with it. It's just made us all of us, much more minded to mental health. You know, call it making lemonade from fine, and taught us also how to be much more efficient. You know, you don't have to hop on an airplane for pretty much everything. You can do everything, much of it remote. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people all over the world have realized this over the last year and a half, which I mean, I think it's wonderful. And yeah, no, I'm glad that you managed to make it work despite COVID. That inopportune timing couldn't have been worse. But
No.
I'm glad you made the most of it, and you're still here and standing. And Grey Matters is going from strength to strength, so that's fantastic.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think that is bringing us to the end of our session, actually. So I would like to thank you very much for your time and for tuning in from Israel, where I know it's already late. So yeah,
Not,
thanks
not a
again
problem.
for
Very
coming on.
happy.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. But very happy to be here, Julia. Thank you for having me. And should anybody from the audience have any questions or ideas, I'd love to pick your brains, no pun intended. And if you want to join the revolution that we're trying to push here, some exciting opportunities ahead for us. So thank you.